Welcome to eDiscovery Leaders Live, where I get a chance to chat with luminaries in eDiscovery and related areas. This broadcast is sponsored by Reveal-Brainspace, the industry's leading AI eDiscovery platform. Don't forget to subscribe to watch me, George Socha, weekly with leaders in eDiscovery. Thank you for tuning in. Welcome to eDiscovery Leaders Live, hosted by ACEDS and sponsored by Reveal. I am George Socha, Senior Vice President of Brand Awareness at Reveal. Each Friday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern, except for last week, I host an episode of eDiscovery Leaders Live, where I get the chance to chat with luminaries in eDiscovery and related areas. Past episodes are available on the Reveal website. Go to revealdata.com, select resources, then select eDiscovery Leaders Live. Last week was a bit different. We were broadcasting live from Legal Week. This week, we return to our normal schedule. And our guest this week is Joy Heath Rush. Joy is CEO of ILTA. She has spent nearly 40 years providing document and IT services to lawyers. Prior to joining ILTA, she was a VP of Client Development at Latera, which she joined following a 28-year career at the global law firm Sidley Austin. She's got a long history of leadership in peer networking groups associated with legal technology, beginning with the Washington Perfectionists, which I had not heard of before, the first WordPerfect user group dedicated to legal. She served on the Legal Advisory Council for both WordPerfect, which I do remember, and for Microsoft. Joy, welcome.
Thank you, George. I'm so happy to be here. And I have to think every time I talk to someone in litigation support of all my days with a hand bait stamper and coding sheets to enter into a BRS database, but we won't flash back to that.
We won't flash back to that. And no, I do not have myself a hand stamper still. We went from the hand stampers to the printed sheets to all of that. I do have still the magnifying glass I used to use way back when we just had copies, photocopies, blowback from microfilm, and I tried to decipher the really poor quality words, so I need to hover over the magnifying glass to try to read them. I'm sure you had the same experience.
Absolutely, and especially in one particular matter, I remember that the original complaint was filed in 1958, and it didn't go to trial till 1988. Yeah.
Well, I did work on one matter where I answered the original complaint in, I think it was 1989. And when I left to start my own consulting practice, that case still, and that was in 2003, that case still was a long, long way from trial.
But we were only 5 years old when that was going on, George. We were very precocious.
Yes, and we had our own bleak house moments.
Absolutely. There's no question about it.
Well, we've got a couple topics I want to cover today, but before we get to those, I gave a very brief overview of who you are and what you've done in the past. Why don't you fill that in a little bit? One, what you did to take you to where you are today, and two, what you're doing today.
Well, always glad to talk about the career journey because, I always talk about myself as being the accidental IT person. I got out of college. I was working just kind of in an office trying to figure out what I really wanted to do. And my office wanted to send me to this word processing training for this program, this dedicated system called CPT. And I was like, nope, nope, nope. Did everything I could to get out of it. Was so phobic about that technology. And finally, my boss just scheduled me for the training. And I'm like, this is it. I'm going to get fired. I was convinced I was going to get fired. So I go to the training class. At lunchtime, I call back to the office and I'm like, oh my God, this is the best thing ever. I love this. And I was in technology ever after that. And when I started at Sidley in 1986, there was no IT department in any law firm in 1986. There was processing. That's what was automated. And that's where I started. And then I had the very first personal computer in the entire firm was in my word processing department. It was an IBM PC XT with a 10 megabyte hard drive. And that was a big deal because they were all dual floppy disk systems then. And we did our very first litigation.
So you were fancy then. You had
we
dual
were
floppy
really
disks.
fancy. Yeah. And then we had a legal assistant who got a PC and developed a trial exhibit list using DB2. And we set up an emulator to print it off of my word processing system. I mean, we thought we were fancy, fancy schmancy.
Oh, but you were the cat's pajamas of the day. Definitely.
We were looking ahead. And then it's like everything that had to do with automation, I wanted my people to be involved in it. I mean, it's like, I knew that the future was not these dedicated word processing systems. You know, they were these computers with all the applications that were going to run on them. And so we started supporting WordPerfect 4.1 and WordStar and Samna and all these. I mean, we ran multiple PC-based systems. And then when an IT department became an IT department, I was in the DC office of Sidley, and they moved me to the mothership here in Chicago to be part of the word processing department and the IT department in a new area called applications. And I kind of went and grew from there. At one point, I oversaw the global desktop for 4,000 users and about 4,000 applications. And then when I went to Latera, I got to see how the applications really get developed, which was fantastic for me. And I worked a lot with our customers and our end users, but I got to be that kind of translator between what the end users wanted and what the developers could deliver, which was fantastic. I loved that. It was absolutely great. During my time with Sidley, I got involved in ILTA. I went to my first, it was then LawNet, ILTA conference in 1996. I was hooked. Kathy Riley, whom you probably know, she's an ILTA veteran and luminary, as you'd say, was like, you need to volunteer. And I did. And I ended up serving on the board of directors. I was president of the board of directors. I kept very active. ILTA was so critical to my career. And it's like, to me, this encapsulates what ILTA was for me. My executive director would call me and say, I need to know what the following 6 firms are doing about XYZ, and he would list off the firms. And it's like, how long will it take you? I said, 10 minutes, maybe 15.
Yep.
You call your buddies and you get the information that you need. And that was it. And then when I was at Latera, it was, of course, an ILTA sponsor. So I kind of got to see the organization from that side. And then when the CEO role came open, I was like, okay, I loved what I was doing. It would have taken a job like this to pull me away from that. But it's like, to me, it was the chance of a lifetime to take my lifelong passion for legal technology, loving to lead people, work with the legal tech leaders. I mean, it was just a dream come true as far as I was concerned. So I started in this role in October of 2018. So I've got 4 years coming up, which is really fast. Yesterday, one of my staff was like, it's time for you to have a PC refresh. And I'm like, wow.
We've reached that point.
I have been here a long time. Right, exactly. And, I oversee the staff. I have a fantastic team of about 25 people. I work directly with our board of directors and with a lot of our other volunteer groups. But I also have the distinct pleasure of kind of getting to insert myself in all kinds of content areas. So I, for example, work directly with our G100 advisory group on programming for the large firm CIOs, because I came out of a Global 10 firm. It's kind of, I always say they're kind of my tribe. It's where I grew up. So working with them is fantastic. I work with our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee on activities around that and programming. I've been working very closely on our Microsoft relationship because that touches every one of our members is using Microsoft technology at some level, right? They just are.
It's pretty much impossible not to with what we do.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, even the law firms that are heavily Mac have Windows PCs someplace.
Right. And even if they're heavily Mac, they're almost certainly using Word, Excel, and PowerPoint.
And Outlook.
And Outlook.
It's at the top of the list.
Yeah.
And so, one of our board members, Kara Portwood, and I spend a lot of time working on our Microsoft relationship, helping to plan programming around that. So it's great to be in a place where I can embrace my inner geek, because as I always say, you can take the girl out of the geek, but you can't take the geek out of the girl. But also do the strategic planning and the leadership, and so it's just a fantastic, for me, combination of things to do. I feel very fortunate, very blessed.
Well, it sounds like you are not like that person we were discussing before the call, whose day started at 9 o'clock and really should have ended at 9:05 in frustration. It doesn't sound like you have that type of job at all. Quite the opposite.
No, in fact, it's funny. I tease my board about this because I was so many years an ILTA volunteer. It's like, here's the my paid part of my job, and here's the volunteer part of my job, but one of the things that the staff really believes is that volunteers, members and business partners, are the lifeblood of the organization in terms of planning our programming, particularly. And having that volunteer spirit, even among the staff, I think is so important. And they really do that. Now, some of my staff are former volunteers. Jean Martinez was a volunteer. Denise Ash was a volunteer, just in the past, those two, for example. But you can have that incredible volunteer spirit, even if you don't come out of a long ILTA pedigree.
Right. So I'd like to turn now to two surveys you've done recently. And the findings from those surveys, at least as they relate to e-discovery.
Yep.
The tech survey and the lit support survey. What can you tell us?
Well, there's some interesting things, and I'm going to start with the lit support survey because some of the tech survey findings nicely frame the lit support survey finding. So the lit support survey was conducted in the fourth quarter of 2021, so this is pretty recent stuff. There was a huge theme of practicality about it, and that this focus on core competencies. A lot of the questions are about, what do you do in-house? What do you outsource? What tools do you use? What skills do you assess? What are the practical delivery items that you have in delivering litigation support and e-discovery? So there are a few things here that I think are notable findings, which I'll call out. One is on the issue of outsourcing. There really is not a single organization that is not outsourcing some aspect of litigation support and e-discovery, but usually hosting at a minimum, right, of large quantities of data.
So virtually no one's doing it all on their own.
Exactly right. But once you get past that kind of baseline of outsourcing, you tend to see that people outsource almost everything or almost nothing. And we're really talking about the consultative kind of services is the way I think of it, because I think of professional litigation support and e-discovery people as consultants more than, they're technical consultants. It's really what they do. It's about best practices. There was a very interesting analysis about cost recovery, which I think reflects the bigger conversation about cost recovery writ large. And we're talking about printing, scanning, messenger, all those things that, postage we used to worry about when I started in legal, that people are, again, kind of all over the board about cost recovery, with the only thing being really in common is this sense of the hosting, that people are paying for hosting and they're passing that along. But there's big big differences in philosophy among organizations about cost recovery. And you find there that firm size is a big driver. So one of the things that ILTA does traditionally with our technology-oriented surveys, well, actually all of our surveys, is we cut the data, we look at the overall numbers, and then we cut it by organizational size. It's no surprise to anybody that the tech stack, general tech stack, is usually really big firms are doing this, really small firms are doing this, other people are somewhere in the middle. That is certainly true here with respect to cost recovery and litigation support and e-discovery. The data shows the incredible value of certifications in this particular industry.
So on certifications, what types of certifications were you looking at with that data?
Well, there are two. There are really two. The first one is kind of product-specific certification. So there were a few products that were called out in the survey as where people said this particular product certification is really important. This particular product certification is really important. But there was more kind of the things, and that's one reason I'm so happy to be part of anything to do with ACEDS, because I think it's an absolutely fantastic organization, is the kinds of general certifications that people can get in e-discovery particularly are very valuable in this industry. And it's interesting because in some other parts of IT, I would say security is a notable exception. People want security people with security certifications. But if you're talking about office specialist or maybe the document management system or some other things like that, you don't see that press for certifications nearly as much. But it was clear that in the litigation support e-discovery area that certifications are the two different types are both very important.
So they both matter.
They both matter. It's not one or the other. They both matter. And one of the this is one of the areas where taking the lit support survey and the tech survey together are interesting, because there's some discussion about in general in both surveys about the certifications that matter and assessments that are done. You know, are you doing any kind of skills assessment when people join your organization? It seemed clear to me from the data that definitely happens when an organization brings on somebody in litigation support, especially e-discovery. They're not only looking for certifications, there's some kind of assessment that's being done in that area as well. And that's not necessarily common in other areas. I think there's a sense that that there's a documentable process, and you can document and predict the steps that you need to do. It's like the EDRM does that, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know what the steps are in the process and you can master them. It's a skill set. It's as much a science as it is an art, as opposed to, I think some other jobs, IT jobs are more the other. They're a little bit more art than science.
So if law firms are looking for certifications as a way to indicate capabilities, and if they are performing assessments to evaluate capabilities, invariably they're going to get a range of results back. To what extent are they providing training to fill those gaps or move people further along? And if they're doing that, are they doing it themselves? Are they turning elsewhere? What's happening?
That's a great question. And before I answer it directly, I'll frame it by saying, I think I was saying earlier, I work with our G100 group, and we just completed a survey specifically for the G100, and it was so valuable to them. They've asked us to grow it and send it out to the broader ILTA community, which we will. But it was all about talent management, which right now is probably the hottest single issue across all of legal practice. Not only in IT, but elsewhere, you know, the talent wars. So I say that because one of the questions we asked them was, how has the hybrid workplace affected your recruiting? You know, what kinds of things are you seeing in recruiting? And some of the answers, salaries have increased, absolutely. There are fewer geographical limitations to where people can recruit, which is very interesting. But also, there was a pretty strong minority, I would say around 40%, that are hiring more entry-level people and training them, and hiring more people from outside of legal and training them. Okay. So
Mhm.
they're willing to invest in that. I wish I had asked now specifically about the kind of training they were doing in this area, but based on what we see in the litigation and practice support survey, it's this kind of base set. It's mastering the EDRM process. And there were a couple of specific products, again, that were called out as product skills. Getting certifications in those product skills is critical, and that firms are willing to invest in that. I think the other thing we're seeing across the all size of firms is it's a more of a buyer's or a seller's market in labor than a
So
buyer's market.
let's just pause that
Yeah,
briefly because I have
yeah,
a question, and then we can
yeah,
come back to
yeah,
that.
sure.
Are you able, with the data you got, to tell what sort of differences there are when it comes to training between the training law firms provide to staff
Mhm.
and the training law firms provide to lawyers?
Oh, that's a great question. Wow. Certainly in the tech survey, the training questions are really oriented towards IT staff.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure that's true in the litigation support survey, and I'd have to actually go back and read it and read it again. I think I read it through the lens of assuming it was all about staff, but when I think about the area in which it's operating, it could just as easily be lawyers who are not on the partner track, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
But
and
probably it sounds like then what the data probably was suggesting to you is that for lawyers on the partner track, they're not getting a whole lot of training on what to do about e-discovery.
I really believe that's true.
Okay.
And because I think the data very much reflect an operational orientation
Mm-hmm.
to this training that I wouldn't necessarily expect for the lawyers that were, again, on the partner track, as opposed to someone who is a dedicated litigation support or e-discovery counsel,
Mm-hmm.
for example. Yeah, it's
Okay.
a great.
So I interrupted you.
No,
Let's go
that's all
back
right.
to your regularly scheduled programming.
No, I
So
was just saying that I think it's
yeah.
a seller's market for labor right now. You know,
Mm-hmm.
the candidates have more power than they've ever had before, and they're asking for things that law firms haven't necessarily had to do before, or may have to do now. And that includes a real interest in a remote working environment or more ability to be flexible about working remotely. But it's also, they want more training. They want to understand what their career path is. Um, and we have to manage that more directly with staff than maybe we have in the past, where we've managed it very well with associates moving towards partnership. And we know what happens in years 1, 2, 3. We know what happens with mid-levels. We know what happens to 6th and 7th years or 8th. We know what a partner's life looks like the first 5 to 10 years of partnership, that kind of thing. But not necessarily that level with the staff. And it's a very different market right at this particular moment.
Any other, before we turn to the last topic, any other insights coming out of either of those surveys?
I can tell you, I put down a couple, so I thought you might ask me a question like that. Of my personal favorite and what I thought were the most fascinating. So my personal favorite about e-discovery was there's a top 3 criteria for selecting a provider, a third-party provider. Pricing is number 1, which probably wouldn't surprise anybody.
Mm-hmm.
But quality and expertise was second, and just by a teeny bit. They were very, very close. So price isn't the only factor. That is, even if the price is great, law firms are not going to buy from an organization with a poor reputation. And I thought that was really, it's like my favorite takeaway. To me, the most fascinating one is there was a question about the top 5 data types that organizations are asked to preserve. The number 1, which should probably scare all of us, is network shares and local loose files. Now, with everything we have done to for document management, for e-discovery, for knowledge management, really trying to organize our content. 25% of the respondents had that in their top.
And are they talking about their own data at that point as opposed to their clients' data?
I think it was a combination.
Okay.
So I just thought that was fascinating. And email was second, but it wasn't first. And I certainly would have expected email to be at the top of the list. I don't know about you, but that's what I would have expected going into reviewing that.
I think 2 years from now, you'll see a different set of results than you got this time. Well, I think right at the top of the list 2 years from now are going to be all those other forms of electronic communication. Text, chat, Slack,
direct
Teams,
messages,
all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things the tech survey and the litigation support survey both show is, the move to the cloud was greatly accelerated by the pandemic. That's not news to anybody. But one of the implications of that, obviously, in the e-discovery world is all of these new cloud repositories. I can remember the Sidley general counsel telling me years ago, he's retired now. He said, there are two things that keep me awake at night. The first one is the courts are going to ask me to produce something and I won't because I don't know where it is. And the second one is the courts are going to ask me to destroy something and I don't because I don't know where it is. And I never forgot that. To me,
and those same problems, right? Those same problems are with us today. Yep. Well, we have just a few minutes left, and I don't want to miss the opportunity to ask you about this summer's ILTACon. What's in store?
Well, the grid of sessions is being released on March 31st, so we're almost there. Our committee, and I think most people know, we have a group of volunteers, which is both members and business partners, that work together to collect ideas, to develop the content, to find the speakers. So we're releasing the grid on the 31st. Speaker applications open April 1st. All of you out there, take a look, see if there's something where you would like to speak. It's a great place to cut your teeth there if you're not experienced with that, and fun for people who are. So that'll be open all during the month of April. We'll be together at National Harbor in Washington, D.C. area in August. And while I don't want to...
do you recall the specific dates?
Of course, you were going to ask me that. And you would think it would be right in my head.
Well, there are a lot of things to tend to.
Yes, I have. My head is not as clear as it used to be. We start on the 21st of August, and we're at the Gaylord National Harbor, which is right across the Woodrow Wilson Bridge from
returning there, I believe, right?
This is our fourth time there, I think. And by the way, ILTACon was the very first conference they ever held at that hotel.
Well.
So we have a long history with them.
A distinction no one else will ever be able to have.
Exactly.
Right.
And I will tell you, though, as always, and I don't want to tip the hand of the committee, but there will be considerable content devoted to litigation support and e-discovery. We usually have a full day that's dedicated to that. And we often have a single master or mistress of ceremonies who kind of runs the day, and very, very practical as well as theoretical programming. But there will also be a lot of information governance content. Just like e-discovery, information governance has taken a huge change over the past 2 years. And the kinds of things you're talking about that we have to preserve, we're also figuring out how to govern. Of course, their two are inextricably related. So beyond the practicalities of the day-to-day job of e-discovery, the issues around information governance and how clients are thinking about it, how law firms are thinking about it, how general counsel are thinking about it, is going to be programming that will be very valuable to the people who work in e-discovery and litigation support. It creates context for the tasks you're asked to do and helps you know if the tasks you're asked to do maybe aren't complete. There are other things people ought to be thinking about.
Well, thank you for that update. Thank you as well for taking time from what I know is a very, very busy schedule to chat with us today. Joy Heath Rush is CEO of ILTA. I am George Socha. This has been eDiscovery Leaders Live, hosted by ACEDS and sponsored by Reveal. Joy, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you to Reveal-Brainspace, to ACEDS for having me. I loved the opening montage. I'm like, I know that person, of the fantastic people that have been on this program that are involved in these efforts. And thank you for everything you do for the industry, and thank you for having me.
Thank you again.